Now I've talked about what shift right testing is. I've talked about why we want to do it and compared it to shift left testing. Now I want to talk about some practices that we think, and they're not an exhaustive list, but some practices that we think are critical to learning from shift right testing. So I'm not going to be talking, I'm not going to be talking about how to run the tests per se. They could be automated tests. They could be manual tests that you execute, but it's about how to prepare to make the most of those, how to get value from them, how to learn from them. Because to deploy another meme, one does not simply test in production. Going back to my original premise, shift right testing is not about just arbitrarily testing things in production because you didn't do it earlier. It's about executing tests in production that you can learn from. And so what I'm going to talk about here is how to be prepared to learn from those tests. And as I mentioned earlier, in terms of mobile testing, as we go through each of these practices, I'll talk about how mobile testing in particular, what considerations may need to be taken into account. And we've got 4 practices that we're going to talk about, and they're split into 2 groups. 2 of them are about deployment, how you get your software into production and how that can support shift right testing. And 2 are about monitoring, how you watch what happens in your production environment and how that, again, can support your testing. So the first of our deployment approaches is what's called a Canary release. And this isn't terribly complicated, but I think it's worth talking about. The notion behind a Canary release, and the term comes from canary in a coal mine, having something that is you're going to deploy that is going to warn you about issues. So the canary would warn you if there was an oxygen issue in the coal mine. Canary releases aren't always about warning you about bad things. Sometimes they're just about getting new features into an environment where you can test against them. So the notion in Canary releasing is that you've got a release already in your production environment, and you're going to take some subset of production, maybe a server, maybe a cluster of servers, and you're going to deploy your next release into that. And then you're going to use typically some part of your infrastructure to separate your user base. Maybe you're doing it through load balancing. Maybe you're doing it in mobile applications. You may be choosing to connect to different backend endpoints, but you're splitting some of the usage so that generally the bulk of your usage stays on your, let's say 1.0 release, and then the rest is cycled over into your next release, where you can start to both have real usage and do some of your testing. Again, automated testing or manual testing applied against this new release. And that's a place where now you can learn, if there was anything that was missed in earlier environments, pre-production environments, maybe that didn't have all the complexity. You also, because you're not just doing testing, you're also putting some real load on the system. You start to see whether there are usages, users, devices that you haven't seen before that bring out different behaviors in the system. And you do it in a controlled fashion so that over time, you can start to deploy more and more of your new software into the environment. And eventually, all your systems are running 1.1. In addition to functionality, another major way that Canary releases are used is a way of testing new infrastructure, right? Because they give you the opportunity to, maybe in your 1.1 version, you have switched your queuing from SQS to Kafka, or you've switched your database. This is a wild switch, but from one database version type to another, from MySQL to Postgres or Postgres to MySQL. Those are things that you can do in a Canary release strategy. Given that description, I want to talk about a couple of things that when you're doing this with a mobile application, you need to keep in mind. And those are that mobile applications, unlike your standard web application, you've typically got two parts to the application. You've got your back-end APIs and you have your front-end mobile application. Those are going to have to be coordinated in your Canary release. You'll probably need to release your back-end in advance, and then you're going to need to release your new mobile system into, either maybe your test flight beta release cycle, or maybe we'll talk about this as the very next thing. Maybe you'll have switches in your mobile application that let switch between your different backends.